Hi, I'm Andy Aladort, and today's lesson is going to be on fretboard tapping. Fretboard tapping is a technique popularized by the great Eddie Van Halen from the band Van Halen, and became commonly used by many guitar players since Eddie. Another guitar player known for fretboard tapping is Randy Rhoads, but Eddie's really considered the king of fretboard tapping. In this lesson, I'll begin with the simplest tapping techniques, and as the lesson progresses, we'll get into more complex procedures. Here we go. All right, the fretboard tapping technique is that you use a finger from the pick hand to tap onto the fretboard to make the sound of a note. Eddie Van Halen likes to use his index finger. I prefer to use my middle finger, but it really doesn't matter. Any finger will do the job, but that's the idea. A finger comes down on the pick hand to sound a note. And generally, that finger will then pull off of the string by pushing down slightly. So the best thing to do to get started with fretboard tapping is either use your index finger or your middle finger, land on the fret, and then come off the string to sound the open string. Now another thing I'm doing is I'm blocking the rest of the strings with my palm to avoid any excess ringing of the strings. And I'm also blocking the strings with my left hand, the strings that I don't want to ring. So that ensures that we're only going to hear the high E string. So the next thing to do, once you've got a handle on just the basic tapping technique, is move across to the other strings. All right, now that you have an idea of the basic tapping technique, let's add a note with the fret hand, or we're going to add one note with the fret hand that likewise taps the fretboard. You bring a finger down to sound a note in a similar fashion that we've done with the right hand. So there's no standard picking technique involved. You don't even need to use a pick at all. So you start with the tap, the right hand tap on the 12th fret of the high E string, pull off to the open string, and have the index finger of the fret hand land on the 7th fret. So it's a triplet. There's 3 notes involved. 1, 2, 3. And as you play it quickly, you can hear the triplets. So the next thing to do is then move it across to the other strings. You take that same shape and do it on the other strings. Now in that example, I was going across all the strings. You could just go back and forth between 2 strings. Or 3 strings. As you can see, there's a lot of different possibilities of how to move your fingers around. Okay, we have one tap note, with the pick hand that's staying in the same position, and one tap note with the fret hand staying in the same position. Next thing to do is to move the fret hand note around. Now there's an infinite number of melodies that you could create with your fret hand by sounding the string in this way. You keep the string going, and it keeps ringing, and then every note is alternated against this tapped high E note. But there's, an infinite number of melodies that you could create. Those melodies that you can create with your fret hand, of course, can come from any myriad of different scales that you could use. Before we get into the scales, let me just show you how you can just play chromatically with the fret hand moving down the fretboard. And you could do something like this. If you move that over to other strings. All right, now let's try incorporating a scale into what we're doing with the fret hand. If you use an E Aeolian, the notes of an E Aeolian on the high E string would be played like this. So now let's incorporate that scale into our tapped figure. One of the cool things you can do is you can actually cross the tapping right hand with the left hand as you go up, and that would be something like this. All right, you can take this idea and move it over to the other strings, and if you were to use the same fret positions with the fret hand, then it would be the Aeolian mode in the key of the open string. So we had played open, 2nd fret, 3rd, 5th, 7th, 8th, 10th, 12th, 14th, 15th, 17th, 19th, 20th, 22nd. If you were to do that on the B string, that would make B Aeolian, and then you could do a similar tapping figure that we did before. All right, so you can take that shape, those fretboard positions that we did on the E string and the B string, move them over to all the other strings, and play similar tap figures like this. You can, of course, play different melodies based on scales as well. Here's another example of using E Aeolian on the high E string, more in an arpeggio-like manner, playing a bigger shape between the notes on the fret hand, sounded with the fret hand. Here it is. And you can move that over to other strings as well. And then that would be, based on whatever the open string is, that would be the key that that riff would be played in. So this would be B Aeolian. Another cool thing to do is to not incorporate the open string. When we used the open string, we had triplets. Everything was 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, where you had a tap note with the right hand, then the open string, and then a tap note with the left hand. That made 3 notes for a triplet. Now let's eliminate the open string, and we're just going to go from the tap note to a note that's already fretted with the fret hand. And that would be something like this. Okay, we've tried a couple different techniques with the fret hand, fretting chromatically every fret or incorporating a scale, the Aeolian mode, also known as natural minor. Now let's try a technique known as symmetrical shapes. So what I'm going to do with the left hand is I'm going to have a tapped shape that is a note, and then the next note is 3 frets higher. So we have the first tap note. This whole time we've been using the same tap note with the right hand. We haven't changed that at all. The right hand has stayed in the same position at the 12th fret for all these riffs. Now we're going to go from the 4th fret with the left hand to the 7th fret. And then from the 5th to the 8th. So by symmetrical, I mean that we have this 3 fret step and a half difference between the 2 notes that are tapped with the fret hand, and then that's going to move up 3 frets, 3 frets, 3 frets, same distance. And that sounds like this. Now let's move that over to the B string. And the G string. Now you could try using different fingers on the fret hand and not just the index finger. There's different techniques, so experiment with different ways to play that riff. All right, so for all the licks so far, we've been moving the left hand around and keeping the right hand in the same place. Now let's move the tapping hand, the right hand, around while keeping the fret hand in the same place. Here we go. Just like how we had crossed over with the fret hand, you could cross over with this hand. Now I'm going to incorporate a slightly different technique when I cross over with this hand. I'm going to do a double pull off to the open E string. So it sounds like this. Okay, now let's move on to two notes sounded with the fret hand, and this is actually the most common type of tapped figure. You hear Eddie Van Halen use this three-note figure with two fretted notes with the fret hand and one tap note. You hear Eddie do that on Eruption and in his guitar solo. You hear it on Spanish Fly. It's in all kinds of different songs. So let's get into that, the basic technique of sounding two notes with the fret hand with one tap note. Here we go. So let's just use a basic major triad shape for each string. So starting with the high E string, the notes of an E major triad are E, G sharp, fourth fret, B at the 7th fret, and there's another E. Now we're not going to use the open strings for this riff. So the only E we're going to get is the 12th fret tapped E. So we're going to get and in this example, the is the downbeat. So it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, like that. So the way the riff starts is you can start it by sounding the 12th fret tap, pulling off to the 4th fret with the index finger, fretted with the index finger, and then you hammer with the pinky of the fret hand. But you could also use a technique known as a silent tap pull-off, where the first note you want to hear is going to be the G sharp, but you have to sound the note with what is essentially a right-hand tap. So instead of landing hard and sounding that high E note, we're just going to go. So I'm placing the tip of the finger on the E string, but I'm not pushing it down to the fretboard, making a sound. I'm just placing it gently on there. enough so I can essentially pick the string by pulling off with the tip of the index finger, like this. Then you can move that over to the other strings. And what you've got is you've got a major triad on each string. So when you move over to the B string, that sounds the notes of a B major triad. When you move to the G string, sounds the notes of a G major triad. To the D string, it's a D major triad. A string is an A major triad. And the E string, low E string, is again an E major triad. So when you go across the strings, you get the impression of a chord progression because you hear E, go to B, go to G, go to D, go to A, and then go back to E. So you can see there, you have to move over to start the next string. So after the pinky lands with the fret hand, you're not going to land on the same string again with the tap finger. You're going to move over to the next string. So you can start the next string ringing. And the same thing would happen on the way up. All right, now let's use the same shape, and we'll bring the open string back into the picture. And this way, we're going to go. So now we have a 4-note figure, 16th notes. Depending on the beat it's played against, they could be 16th notes or 8th notes or even quarter notes or 32nd notes, 64th notes. Generally, this type of technique is used as a flashy sound, and you don't really think about the exact rhythmic delineation. But it's 4 notes. So we have and so the first sound is the tapped right hand finger, pulled off to the 7th fret, pulled off to the 4th fret, pulled off to the open string. So the fret end is going like that, but you have a tap as well. And then you can move that across to the other strings. All right, now let's take the same idea but with the fret hand, we're going to go back up after we go down. That turns into a 6-note figure. So we had 3-note figures before, triplets. Or now we're going to take this, add 2 more notes to it, the 4-note figure, add 2 more notes. We get a sextuplet. And you can move that over 2 other strings as well. All right, let's continue with some of these same ideas, and we're going to have a fret hand shape based on minor thirds, which is going to move down chromatically. So we're going to go from 7/10, 6/9, 5/8, 4/7. And you hear this type of melodic figure on Van Halen songs like Eruption and The Cradle Will Rock. Let's try that on the B string. All right, let's look a little further into tapped bends. And there's really a million different things you can do. In Eddie's guitar solo, his big guitar solo spotlight that he likes to do when he plays live, he traditionally plays a lick similar to this one here, where I'm going to bend this D up to E, and then I'm going to tap notes on the G string that are going to sound the notes from A Aeolian. Now the thing that happens is, if you looked at the notes from A Aeolian on the G string, and you were to just tap them, you'd have A, B, C, D, E, starting from the 14th fret. But if you bend the G string, because the string is bent a whole step, that A is going to sound if you tap a fret 2 frets lower. Because the string is now sounding a whole step 2 frets higher because it's bent. So instead of tapping 14, 16, 17, 19, you're going to tap 12, 14, 15, 17. And then you can always apply the vibrato with the left hand while the tap is held. Now at the end there, I played an A blues scale on the A string and ended by bending that C, the minor third, up to the major third C sharp. And then I tapped at the 11th fret. Now, because the string is bent a half step, I can tap a half step lower to get the sound of it, to get the sound of the next fret. You put those two things together, you get this. All right, another great tapping technique is where you cross over quickly between two strings. So far we've been playing melodic shapes on one string, moving the melodic shape around, and then taking that shape and moving it over to the other strings. Now we're going to incorporate two strings and move quickly between them. So this riff here, this is again based on E Aeolian, and we're going to have a tapped shape that goes across the top two strings, and then the tapping finger is going to move around. Here's the figure. All right, now let's take this idea of crossing over strings, and we're going to incorporate 3 strings at a time with a specific tap figure. Now this next riff is in the key of A, and it's going to be based primarily on the A Dorian mode. So A Dorian is A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, A, then it repeats A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, A. Here's the riff. All right, now let's add another note with the fret hand. Thus far, we've had either one note sounded or 2 notes sounded with the fret hand and then incorporated the open string. Now let's sound 3 fretted notes with the left hand, and the right hand is going to sound 1 tap note. And you could do this. And if you move that over to other strings,